Thank you for the invitation to speak today, and thank you everyone for coming on really what is an absolutely beautiful day out there. And if you went urban polling, I hope you had a great time. Yeah, so what I'm going to be talking about today is really physical activity messaging. And I just want to start by saying we're all messengers and we all receive messages. And this can be an interesting dynamic because I think we've all had the experience of perhaps being misunderstood, saying something and somebody taking it the wrong way or not understanding what we're saying, or you're not understanding what somebody else is saying. And so this dynamic can cause difficulties. And a personal experience, excuse me, that I had with this just recently is we were running focus groups with women with heart disease. And these women mostly were in their, 70s and 80s. And they talked about how they came to have heart disease, and most of them talked about stress. And we were asking them about where they get information about future prevention, about managing their disease. And they all talked about, again, being surprised about having been diagnosed with heart disease or having had a major cardiac event. They talked again about the incredible stress that they experienced and that they believe that this led to their diagnosis. And when it came to prevention and lifestyle behaviors, the message that they gave quite clearly is stop making us feel bad. We were active before we thought we were doing things right. We were active, we ate right. We thought we were doing the right things. And so when we're getting these messages about, you should be more active, you should be eating your fruits and vegetables, whatever, it was making them feel bad. So this really caused me to pause and think and wonder, what is it that we're doing as a profession, and what is it that we're doing? Sometimes is it that we are just making people feel bad about not being active. And hopefully, there we go. Oops. Technical error. Oh. I had a great funny punchline to the end of that. We're going to get there in a second. Clearly, I don't know how this machine works. Oh, there we go. There's my punchline. So, to end it on a lighter note, we're hoping that, I don't think Calvin's dad meant to take all the fun out of being active and playing, but that was the message that he was giving poor Calvin. So his dad says, that's great. Keep your heart rate up. You're doing well. And poor Calvin is saying, you can take the fun out of anything, Dad, even running through a sprinkler. So we really don't want to make people feel bad. And when we talk about physical activity and physical activity messaging, it's challenging, there's no question. Sometimes I wonder if we're only speaking to the already converted, we're mainly speaking to ourselves. I suspect that everybody in this room is like me. We're in this room because we have an active background. Maybe we were good at sports or we loved being physically active. It brought us into the profession, and it's our jobs to promote physical activity, and it's likely something that we enjoy doing in our leisure time. But it's important to recognize that probably we are all outliers. We're not the norm. We are not the people who struggle to be physically active, who don't really want to be physically active. And so today's themes are going to reflect these ideas, and they're interconnected. And the first theme is what Nora already alluded to, and that's that mixed messages are a problem. They're a problem for people who are trying to promote physical activity, and they're a problem when we're trying to get people to understand what physical activity actually is. The next theme is that in the absence of true barriers, people do things that they like. We like to do things that make us feel good, and where does physical activity messaging fit into this mix? And then the third theme is that people don't spend much time thinking about physical activity messages. So that's the don't overthink it piece. And I'll explore these three themes, and in the end hope to offer, there's no perfect solution to this situation, but hope to offer some suggestions so that we can move forward and perhaps be more effective in our messaging. But before we get there, just one caveat. This is this pie chart graph I stole from PhD Comics, and they developed this to explain what we know about the universe, and I would say it also applies to physical activity messaging. And I would say it's probably an optimistic representation that we already know about messages, how much we already know about messages, about how people think, about what motivates them, and there's a whole bunch that we just have no idea about. But we have to keep trying. We can't obviously give up. And so just keep this in mind that, I don't have a miracle solution for you, but hopefully some suggestions that can help us move forward. So then that brings us to the first theme, and that again is that mixed messages are a problem. And I would say that they're not just mixed, but they're downright contradictory. And health and physical activity and exercise are very, very popular topics in the popular media, in magazines, in news articles, and you get this all the time. And here's one, I'm very sorry that that's so small, but in a different topic area, this is about coffee. So this is Time Magazine tweeting 30 minutes apart, 2 different tweets. The first one on your left says that how coffee can help you live longer. So Time Magazine tweeted out about a research study that talked about how coffee can help you live longer, and then really 30 minutes later, half an hour later, they sent out another tweet that talked about how coffee can cause cancer. So what is just the general public supposed to do with this? Do they keep drinking coffee? Do they not drink coffee? And I would say that if you like coffee, you're going to keep drinking it, and if you don't, you're going to ignore these and keep drinking tea or whatever it is that you like to drink. And then closer to our field, this is another one, and if you can read that, this is all research reporting on one research study, and at the top it says exercise is contagious, especially if you're a man. Right below it, this is just me Googling, and this is a screenshot right off of my computer. Exercise is contagious, but only among women. And then the bottom one is exercise is contagious, especially if you already like it. So maybe if you're a man, maybe if you're a woman, maybe if you're transgendered, maybe if you like it, maybe if you don't, exercise is contagious. I confess I didn't actually read this study. I suspect it's a social networking type study. But, what does this actually mean, and what does the idea of contagious exercise actually mean? And so the problem for physical activity promoters is that, again, there's a bewildering number of messages out there. There are so many messages from so many different sources, it's really, really hard to get a handle on it. And here is a completely unscientific sample that, again, just me Googling. And you can see that there's exercise as medicine stuff up there. It's good for your sex life. It's, should I eat fruit, vegetables? Should I be losing weight? The ubiquitous treadmills. There's things about washboard abs, so there's a very specific toned look, just people exercising. Stop being lazy. And then finally, exercise always reminds me of why I hate exercising. And you see that's a common theme about why, a lot of people are just like, I just absolutely hate this. And the point of this slide, again, is just to illustrate, a very, again, just random sample of images. But all these types of messages can have influences on people's feelings and thoughts about physical activity. And the point I hope to make today is, again, for people who do not spend a lot of time thinking about it. So you're really not interested in physical activity. Maybe sometimes you think, oh, I should, be a little bit more active. It's good for my health. But other than that, you're really not spending a whole bunch of time thinking about it. And that is arguably our target market. We don't want to talk to the people who are already keen on physical activity. We want to talk to the people who are trying to get active. Any and all of these messages can have an influence. So the voice of the physical activity promoter can be lost very quickly in this larger media landscape. And so being aware of what I call the competition, so these sorts of messages, the washboard ab sorts of messages, all these things that you see in various sources, fitness magazines, etc., can really have an influence. And just being aware, and then when you're encountering clients or you're thinking about what sort of message you're going to create, how am I actually going to speak to these people to try to cut through all this other stuff. Another source, of course, that I've already talked about is that research, or reporting on research can add to the mix. And So there's, again, it's a very popular thing. Media, journalists love to talk to researchers about health messaging and physical activity messaging. And here's one example. So did you know that hot baths burn calories? It's fantastic news as far as I'm concerned. And that soaking in a hot bath yields similar benefits to exercise. So, great. It's way easier to hop in the tub and way more comfortable, perhaps, than going out running when it's cold and rainy. And these types of messages can have an influence. This is an example that is personal to me because this is reporting on a study that we did about 7-8 years ago now, and it was picked up by Fitness Magazine. And I have to say this reporting was based on about 3 email exchanges plus 2 phone call follow-ups. And first of all, the headline is completely wrong, Walk Your Way Slim. This study took place in Edmonton, and it was a 6-year longitudinal study where we followed people over 6 years. At the beginning, they were asked why they chose their neighborhood. Why did you choose to buy the house in the neighborhood that you did? And those who said, walkability is important to me, those people maintained their body mass index. So their weight didn't really change over 6 years. Compared to everybody else for whom walkability wasn't important, for those people, there tended to be an increase in BMI. So the point of the study really is that built environments are important, but especially important for the people who really value that. And so the idea of walking your way slim is completely wrong. And then, again, this might be very difficult for you to read, but at the bottom, it gives all kinds of wonderful quotes from me. And at the bottom is one that says, try an indoor mall and shop while you drop the pounds. Now, if anybody knows me at all, knows that this is about the last thing on earth I would ever say. I absolutely hate shopping. And then the idea, really feel strongly that we should disengage the conversation between physical activity and weight loss. So when this came out, I just thought, okay, I give up, I don't know where to go. And then we already talked about this one, that exercise is contagious. What does that actually mean? And then another great research study, drinking wine is a form of exercise. So I figured you should just drink wine in the bathtub, and it's basically a double workout. And then, you're set. Do that every day, and you'll be the fittest person on the planet. You can pick your Olympic sport if you're drinking wine in the bathtub. But again, the point is, what is the, general person supposed to do with this sort of information? It can be incredibly confusing. Another source of information are guidelines. So when we talk about whether, the 10,000 steps a day is ubiquitous, the Canadian Physical Activity Guidelines for adults being 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week. And these are, based on very good scientific evidence, and they're disseminated. So the guidelines are separate than the messaging around guidelines. But, these targets that we hope people to be able to achieve to gain health benefits. And this was really interesting. This is an article that came out in the New York Times in late March. And this is a column that I really, really like, actually. It's called The Well, and Gretchen Reynolds is the journalist. And she just posed the question, should 15,000 steps a day be our new exercise target? And she based this question, and this is a picture of a postal worker, and that's because this article was based on a study that came out of Scotland that showed that Scottish postal workers who walk an average of 15,000 steps a day, and they equate that to about 2 hours per day of fairly brisk walking, about 4 miles per hour of walking. And so they were fitter than their less active counterparts. And so she said, should 15,000 steps be our new target? Fair question. And then I went in and I read the comments. And the comments were, I have to say, outstanding. And the New York Times must have amazing moderators because there was not a troll in sight, which was good. But the comments really were very, very interesting. And there's about 400 of them. And I actually read them all because I found them really interesting. But a lot of them were along the lines of this. walk briskly at 4 mile per hour pace for 2 hours each day in what universe? So there were a lot on this "are you kidding me" theme, like just forget it. And then there were a number of comments that also said, if you think that's unreasonable, you really should be doing that for your health. And when I was reading these comments, know that a body in motion tends to stay in motion, and this person was alluding that to mortality. Reading through the comments and just reading the subtext, it seemed that these were people who were already active. So it was like, great, I'm already achieving 15,000 steps a day, or I'm already doing a couple hours a day, and so I'm on the right path, and so they felt good. And I have to say, they were trying to be encouraging to other people, but you could tell that, for the most part, they seemed already active. And then again, there were a lot of things like, by all means, let's just make this more unrealistic. I'll fit this right in when I finish my 10th serving of vegetables. And a 30-minute walk at lunch would be great. Too bad there are no sidewalks where I work. So really, this comment addressed a true limitation for this person, at least. And then this person said, here I was so excited about reaching my 10,000 steps a day goal. Great, now I got to go to 15,000. So you just feel the defeat in this comment. And then concerned citizen said, nothing is ever good enough, is it? You're like, come on, 10,000, isn't that good enough? And then Meredith said, who would choose to live like that? It sounds horrible. Pushing, like forget it. And there were a number of comments on this going, I have a whole bunch of other things that I like to do. Why would I do that? And then the last comment that I'll show you is from this person. And she said, unfortunately, this will encourage many people to give up. And I would probably agree with her and think that maybe a few people will see that 15,000 steps per day as aspirational, and they'll try to reach it. But, we would need to do the research on this. But I would suspect that a lot of people are just like, throw in the towel, forget it. I'm never even going to reach this. And so this question posed in the New York Times is an interesting question, but the dialogue around it by just, regular readers of the New York Times, who do tend to be pretty highly educated, the readership of the New York Times is reflective of a certain segment of American, international readership, but it was a very interesting dialogue. And regardless, these sorts of messages and guidelines themselves are just another form of messaging that add to the mix, and they affect people's thoughts and feelings about physical activity. So when we pose these questions and we throw these things out there, thinking about how they actually influence people is also important. And this brings me to my second theme, and that is that in the absence of true barriers, people do the things that they like. And I want to emphasize that when I say this, I mean truly leisure time. There are people who have true barriers to being physically active, but I believe that most of the messages that we have out there are really targeting people's leisure time physical activity. They're not trying to push people through barriers. All the, get up and get active type messages are really about leisure time physical activity. And when we're talking about this, people will say, well, yeah, doctor told me to find an activity I liked and do it for 30 minutes a day. Watching TV is an activity I like, so that's the cartoon up there. And yeah, sure, I love exercise, but just not as much as I love wine or drinking wine with my friends or any combination. And so, yeah, forget it. I'm just going to keep doing what it is that I love to do. Okay. On this one, I would like to ask everybody to stand up if you can, or put your arms up in the air. Well, you don't have to have I was thinking if you're not capable of standing up, but sure. Why don't you do some jumping jacks? No, I'm kidding. Okay, now stay standing if you love to run, walk, or wheel. Wheel, like if you're in a, yeah. So everybody, fantastic. Now, stay standing and be honest here. If your absolutely favorite place to do this activity, whether it's running or walking or wheeling, is on a treadmill, in the absence of any other. Okay, there's a few treadmill people up there, or else they just don't have. So you would actually, yeah, he's trying to sit at the back, but he doesn't have a chair. Squatting, okay, good. All right. So there's a very few people here who actually would prefer, especially on a day like today, go on a treadmill. So that's great. Keep standing if you want, or keep sitting. So the vast majority of you sat down, and if I actually like running too, and if I had a chair here, I guess I could have gone and sat down over there. I would have sat down too. But if you do not like running on treadmills, you are not alone. And the treadmill was invented in 1817. It was called the treadwheel back then. And the purpose of the invention of the treadmill was to punish prisoners. It was invented in the UK. It was part of the British penal system. And it was thought, and they put prisoners on there for 4 to 6 hours a day, which is punishing. And the thought was that if you are forcing people to do something that is completely meaningless, completely mindless, there is no purpose than just walking or running on this thing for hours and hours a day, that it is absolutely punishing your heart and soul. So that is the original invention of the treadmill. And it wasn't until I got all this information from a fantastic episode of CBC Radio's The Current from April 17th. So if you're interested, you can probably find it and listen to it. It's really interesting. But the point is that the treadmill was not designed, to engage people to be physically active for fun. It was it was invented to torture people. So if you feel that running on a treadmill is torturous, and I will say that I absolutely do. I love running, and probably the longest I've ever lasted on a treadmill is about 20 minutes, and then I can't take this anymore. But unfortunately, again, for the people who don't think a lot about physical activity, the default is, well, I need to go to the gym. I need to get more active, so I need to go to the gym. So going to the gym is their idea. And, what comes to mind automatically when they think about being physically active. And running on a treadmill is what comes to mind when they think about the idea of exercise. And that's because the images that we often see in the popular media, that we see in fitness magazines, is of fitness centers and is of treadmills. And so it's no wonder that people think of treadmills as torture, because that's what they were designed to do. And if that is what your default thinking of is the only way that I can be physically active is to go and run on this torturous machine, then forget it. I'm not even going to do it. And so the question that we often ask ourselves is, why don't people exercise even though they know it's good for them? The vast majority of North Americans, of Canadians, certainly know that physical activity is good for our health. That is no question. But the answer is that behavior is largely influenced by our likes and our dislikes. And exercise is more positively influenced by what we would call affective messages, messages that target our emotions. So something like exercise is fun, as opposed to what we would call cognitive messages, messages that influence things like exercise is good for you. It's good for your health. It's good for this. And there's a lot of research in this area. Ryan Rhodes at the University of Victoria does a lot of really interesting work in this area. But the affective messages are much more powerful than are the cognitive messages. But I will, again, add a little bit of a caveat here. And so you can see the 3 asterisks is up here by exercise is fun, if you believe it's fun. If you don't believe that exercise is fun, then you might get the pushback that life is too short to do stuff that you hate. So it can be quite challenging, and I recognize that it's challenging to try to, convince somebody who absolutely hates the idea of physical activity and exercise to be physically active, but that's one of the challenges for us as a profession, to try to elicit positive emotions. And we're going to come back to that idea in a bit. And so, as I said, the idea of emotion is critical, and this is one of my favorite Twitter feeds. Something academics say, but if you don't, and so he pokes fun at the idea that, researchers and scientists like to call emotion affect, but that's basically what we're talking about. And as noted in the previous slide, we focus on affective attitudes because they're more likely to have an influence. But what if being active doesn't make you feel good? What if while you're actually moving, it's uncomfortable or painful, or you don't understand, so you've never really been physically active before, and you don't know the difference between, exercise can be painful even for those of us who are active a lot, but we understand what that means. We know how our bodies are reacting to it. But what if it's something that's completely new to you and you don't really know if that pain is meaning I should stop, or it's just part of what it is that we're doing, or you're doing too much too soon and it's painful. And what if there's psychological pain? So you're trying to be physically active and you don't feel like you fit in, or you're being made fun of, or you just don't belong in this environment. Then the reaction that you might have, this emotional reaction, might be that how much you hate doing this. And those emotions will likely have a stronger influence. That feeling that you're having in the moment of being physically active is likely to have a stronger influence, even if you feel good afterwards. You're going to remember that feeling that you had, the negative feeling that you had while being physically active. And so the no pain, no gain message is terrible. I don't think anybody in this room uses it, but no pain, no gain is an absolutely terrible message. And it's important to note that messages, and those, not just those from physical activity promoters, can also target really other important psychological constructs. So we can target things like self-efficacy. So poor Sally here, who the football is almost the same size as her, and Linus is asking her to kick it back to her, and she's like, "You're kidding, right? Like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to kick this football." And so targeting confidence can be equally important. And there's other things like beliefs. If you eat well, get good sleep, exercise, and drink plenty of water, you'll die anyways. And you hear that often. And this sort of belief, mixes up morbidity and mortality, I would say. And the idea of, you'll feel better for a lot longer, likely, if you're engaging in healthy habits. You can also target motivation. So what are people's actual motivations to be physically active? But the point is that it's really harder to enjoy something if you're not confident, if you don't have those beliefs that it's something that is good for you or something that you should be doing, or if you're unmotivated. So thinking about the actual thing that you're targeting when you're creating a physical activity message and how it might actually make somebody feel is an important thing to do. And that brings me to my third theme, and that's that people probably do not spend as much time as we'd like to think about physical activity messages. And these are, random facts. Again, I love Google, and I love Google Images. Things like if walking is good for your health, the postman would be immortal. So that's our New York Times study. A rabbit only eats vegetables, runs, and hops all day long, and only lives 5 years. A tortoise doesn't run and does nothing energetic, yet lives for 450 years. So, these random facts are obviously meant to be as a joke, but they are based in people's emotions and in their beliefs. And so, people will laugh at this because they're like, yeah, and then they'll go, yeah, okay, well, it's funny, I get it. I don't actually think I'm a tortoise, but sure, if I am physically active, am I actually going to get all those benefits that they're talking about? So before we proceed with this theme, I would like to do a little memory quiz if you would want to participate. Don't worry, it's not on, what did I say on slide 4? No, it's not that sort of memory quiz. What I'm going to do is read out a list of words. And what I want you to do is just listen to me while I'm reading them out. And then when I'm done, I'll give you 10 or 15 seconds to write down as many of them as you can remember. So it's just a basic word memory quiz. Okay? Are we ready? Okay, so I'm just going to read them out, and then we'll see how many of these words you can remember. You ready? Door, glass, pane, shade, ledge, sill, house, open, curtain, frame, view, breeze, sash, screen, shutter. Okay, 10 seconds. Well, 15. Okay. People are still trying. It's a room full of physical activity and exercise people. There might be a little bit of competition happening here. That's okay. All right, so how many of you got the word door? Okay, a lot of people. Good, because door is the first word that I read out. First word on the list, that tends to be, what we would call a primacy effect, the first word, one you tend to remember. What about the word glass? Same thing, second word that I read out, the word shutter. Lots of you, the very last word that I read, screen. Yeah. What about house? Okay, that one, a few less people. That was in the middle. What about the word window? Okay, window wasn't on the list. So, this is a really old psychology paradigm. It's been around since the 1950s. And what it is it's illustrating the concept of associative processes. All the words on the list that I read out have associations with the word window. So we know that windows have glass and panes and that we cover them with curtains and shutters and screens. So as we're trying to remember those words, they're being associated in our memories, in our minds, with the concept of window. So in forensic psychology, people use this to study false memories, eyewitness accounts, these sorts of things. But it really illustrates how something in our environment can trigger associations that may not be actually present, but they're things that make us think of related things. So again, we've learned over time what windows are associated with, and so we remember this word window. Now imagine again the many different ways that exercise and physical activity are represented, and consider what associations might be automatically activated by the concept of exercise or physical activity. So when you put out a message that says physical activity, what do people associate that with in their mind, in the same way that you associated all these words with the idea of windows? And this illustrates the idea that we are what we'd call all lazy thinkers, every single person on this planet. We don't take a lot of time to think about messages, and this is rooted in the idea that there's two fundamental ways of thinking. At one level are our automatic responses, these gut reactions. They're often emotional. The window example isn't really emotional. Most people don't have strong emotions attached to the idea of windows, but you have learned over time what other words might be associated with windows. These are things that exist in memory. They are triggered when we see cues in our environment, and they're that immediate, automatic, very fast response that we have in terms of thinking about something. And the other way of thinking is what we would call reasoned responses. And this is when we actually take the time to stop and think about something. But the point is that it takes work to think. You actually have to want to be able to think hard about something, and not even hard, just to spend a little bit of time. And when I'm talking about time here, I am talking in the space of seconds. Our automatic reactions happen in less than half a second. Like, it is lightning fast. When we're talking about taking the time to actually stop and think, we might only be talking about a few seconds, or you can spend a lot longer. But in order to engage in these reasoned responses, in taking the time to think about something, you have to be motivated to think about something, you have to be willing to actually want to think about something, and you have to have the capability to be able to think about something. So it might take prior knowledge, it might mean that you might have to have the actual time. Sometimes we just don't have the time to stop and think about something. And this is affected by how interested we are in a topic, by our moods, and by our abilities. And Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for his work in the idea of dual process, or I said I wasn't going to use that word, in the idea of these two ways of thinking. He won the Nobel Prize in 2003 to show how we are, and the idea of lazy thinking comes directly from Kahneman, and he makes the point that we default most of the time to our automatic reactions unless we actually want to put the effort into thinking about something. So when we think about the applications of this to physical activity, when we're presented with a message about physical activity or exercise, we may not think much more about beyond what our initial automatic response is. So if our default response is to associate exercise and physical activity with treadmills, we might not take much more time to think about it. Again, we default to, I love this, the concept of exercise, or unfortunately, alternatively, I hate it. And this really highlights again that depending on our experience and where you get your information, the concept of exercise can be associated with so many different things. So health, and again, most people, and we do these studies in our lab all the time, health is really strongly automatically associated with exercise, but it's not an emotional response. But the idea of appearance is also really automatically associated, and that's much more of an emotional association for people. Do I look the part? Do I look the way I should? You can also associate exercise with whether it's a social experience for you, whether it's fun or boring, whether it's painful, whether it's associated with my body weight or my body shape. I could go on for quite some time. And again, these may or may not be thought about depending on interest, mood, and motivation. And again, I'm guessing that the vast majority, if not every single person in this room today, likes being physically active, and that it's something that we enjoy doing. And so if you consider, something I did this weekend, playing a fun game of soccer in the park with friends, I'm storing memories of that physical feeling of exertion that I actually enjoy. I have a lot of experience with it, and it's something that I like. But I'm storing these memories of these feelings of exertion, the really positive feeling of being with my friends, the smell of freshly mown grass, warm sun. All of these combined created a very positive, rewarding memory for me. And the more experiences that people have like this, the stronger the memory traces for the idea of exercise being associated with something positive. So you have lots and lots of positive experiences of being physically active, and it's making you feel good, the more likely that your automatic response to the idea of exercise is going to be positive. But flip that around and imagine somebody who was bullied in phys ed class or was never very good at sports. That person's immediate reaction might be anger or shame, no matter what the message that they see about exercise actually says. And then much of the subsequent messaging that this person might see is the cover of fitness magazines and pictures of people in fitness centers on treadmills. And then these are the associations that those people likely are having automatically activated. And so the concept of health might come up for them, but the negative emotions that are associated with exercise might be a whole lot more powerful. And that might be what actually drives their behavior. So when we're creating physical activity messages, we're really hoping that the associations are positive. And one really interesting study, this was done in Europe a few years ago, was that positive gut reactions and emotions were related to the decision to do a planned exercise session, even when faced with the decision of being invited to go out for a drink with friends. So these were people who had said, yes, I want to, I'm planning on going out and working, going to do some exercise after work. And then some people say, well, we're going out for dinner, we're going out for drinks, why don't you come with us? Those whose immediate automatic response is positive were more likely to say, no, I'm going to still go and work out or go and do my exercise. And the other people, those whose immediate automatic response was negative, were more likely to go, okay, forget it, I'm not going to go exercise. It's much more enticing, and who wouldn't do this? I can go do something I hate, or I can go and do a very positive, rewarding things and be with my friends and have some fun. So that immediate reaction that people have can really drive people's decisions to be physically active. So thinking about what somebody's, what I call gut reaction might be, is really important when we're thinking about physical activity message. Another basic immediate response is the idea of who's even paying attention. So we automatically attend to things in our environment that match our interests and goals. So if you're walking through the grocery store and you see the row of magazines, the magazines that are popping out at you are those that match what your interests are. So you might see the fitness magazine or the ones that have the loudest, most eye-catching cover, of course. But we do tend to automatically attend to things in our environment. And the idea of whether you think of yourself as an exerciser, whether you think of yourself as a physically active person, whether you've internalized this idea, really guides information processing and attention. And so how we think of ourselves, again, is based on our prior experience and learning. Have we grown up and been physically active throughout our whole lives? Is this something that we really associate with ourselves? If so, then you are the person who's more likely to pay attention to those physical activity messages. And we've shown in a bunch of different studies, not just me, a number of different people have studied this, that people who are already active, so the people who have internalized this idea that, yes, I'm an exerciser, they're the people who are automatically attending to exercise-related information. So this is this idea that we may actually be only reaching the people who are already interested in. And then one study, one of my very first studies that I did back in 2005, showed that non-exercisers were showing what we call attentional bias. They were automatically attending to very negative words like lazy and unmotivated, things like the sort of couch potato type stereotype. And I would argue that this really highlights the need for formative evaluation, for pre-testing messages before they go out. Are they likely to attract the attention of your target audience, or are they only attracting the attention of people who are already interested in? Another illustration of this is, again, about a decade ago, we evaluated some advertisements that were designed to target seniors, and they were designed to target exercise behavior and eating fruits and vegetables in seniors. And they were meant to be lighthearted, and they were meant to be funny, and the comic character in them was the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper got knocked out by a baseball. So the idea is if you're physically active, you get knocked out by a baseball. And we did a big, population level survey with over 1,600 people, and we found in that survey that, sure, seniors were absolutely paying more attention, that they were the ones who tended to remember the ads, they were the ones who were seeing them. But then we ran focus groups with seniors, and we showed them the ads, and what we discovered through the focus groups is the reason that the seniors were paying more attention to the ads was because they hated them. They hated the idea of the Grim Reaper. They didn't find it funny. They just thought these ads are ridiculous. And as one participant said, we know we're going to die, we don't need the reminder. So really being very clear about what your messages are saying to people. So back to that idea that sometimes the messages that we put out there are likely being misinterpreted, and doing that pre-test is absolutely important. One last study in this area of two modes of thinking is another interesting study that showed that exercisers tended to ignore negative feedback about not being fit or attractive more than non-exercisers. Now I have to highlight that this was bogus feedback. It was just made up. People were randomly told that they were either fitter or less fit than other people. And so the non-exercisers were more likely to internalize, when compared to other non-exercisers, they were more likely to believe, yeah, I'm not even as fit as these other people who don't exercise. So they were really internalizing it and believing that they were not fit and that they were not meeting that idea of what an exerciser is. The exercisers were able to go, I don't care what you say, I know that I'm just fine and that I'm just as fit as anybody else and I'm going to carry on. So the implication of this is quite sobering, and that's that if you are not an exerciser, so if you're not somebody who thinks of yourself as an exerciser, and you get into an intimidating situation, and gyms can be quite intimidating, and you get some negative feedback, and not necessarily explicitly, but this could be implicit negative feedback. You're made to feel you don't belong because you don't look right or you don't act right, you don't fit the part. You're probably just going to turn right around and walk away. You're probably not going to stay to exercise. So how people have internalized these ideas of what an exerciser looks like and what they should be doing is really important. So that brings me to the last piece here, and that's, can we offer any solutions to this idea? Again, thinking back to that caveat that it's everybody in this room faces an uphill battle. It's a challenging area, again, in the face of so many other messages, but what can we actually try to do? And the first thing that I'd like to say is that commercial marketers already know all this stuff, and they're already exploiting this. They know that attitudes towards products are automatically activated and that this affects purchasing behavior, particularly, again, when the motivation to think about something is low. So I would guess that the cardio twister people really don't care if you use the cardio twister. They just want you to buy it. And so they've got, these very, very attractive photoshopped people on their machine. And if you're sitting at home and it's late at night and you're thinking, oh, you know, I probably should get some more exercise, and then the cardio twister comes up and you're not really thinking all that much, and the next thing you know, you've fired off your Visa card and you've bought it. And, you know, exploiting things, you know, people's deep-seated thoughts around losing weight. And this one is, you know, quite old, but you lose weight the easy way with tapeworm eggs. Let's all try that. Commercial marketers know this. They exploit this. This is why branding is really, really important and having really strong brands. And we all know about how the layout of grocery stores influences our purchasing behavior. But the same applies not only to buying exercise equipment, but to behavioral decisions. So not assuming that people are thinking long and hard about what it is that you have to say, but you know, assuming that just when you're creating messages, assuming that motivation to think is low. So I am not, please, not advocating to use images like this, but I am advocating for, you know, keeping messages simple and straightforward. And as I've already said, so this is Daniel Kahneman here, is it takes work to think. And I need to emphasize his point again, and that's that we are inherently lazy thinkers. So this is a quote directly from Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he says that people can overcome some of the superficial factors, so the pictures of beautiful people, the plays on our emotion. We can overcome those that produce these illusions of truth, these ideas of what we think might be true, even though they're not, when we're strongly motivated. And again, he uses this to highlight the idea that we default to our automatic reactions, because more often we are these lazy thinkers and we rely on these automatic associations. And this is, again, why I argue that physical activity promoters should be aware of the competition. This is just a compilation of all the pictures that I've shown earlier throughout this presentation. And the influence of one message may be very limited in light of this incredibly complex physical activity and exercise messaging world. But I'm not meaning to, you know, destroy all hope or anything, but to highlight that if you're talking one-on-one with a client, or you're thinking about your message that's going out there, the first step is to be aware of what you're up against. It's going to be an uphill battle. But then can we make others aware of where their ideas are coming from? Why do people believe fitness magazines and not public health professionals? Is it because they've seen those fitness magazines many, 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 many times, and this may be their first experience with a kinesiologist or with somebody who's working in the profession? If we stop and think about the messages that are out there, where they come from, and how pervasive they are, we're in a better position as professionals to break down myths and engage more in thinking about physical activity. Because again, we are all lazy thinkers, and we're all lazy thinkers about something. And so having some compassion about why people might be thinking what they are about physical activity is one way to start to move the profession forward. So again, I've already said this once, but my personal plea is to ask everyone to stop talking about physical activity and weight loss together. If we can just completely remove those two concepts from the conversation, then maybe we can start to make some headway so that people's default thinking is, oh, you know, the reason that I need to get some physical activity is because I need to lose a couple of pounds, and this idea will disappear. And so one suggestion is, can you try to put people in a good mood? It increases information processing, so people will be more likely to think about your message by putting people in a good mood. It isn't necessarily easy, but can we try to at least not make people feel bad? So can we try not to make people feel guilty about the decisions that they're making? And I know that everybody in this room is trying hard to be encouraging and positive about the subject, but it's challenging when you're actually trying to create a message to put people in a good mood. And can you repeatedly present exercise, the concept of physical activity or exercise, in fun contexts, regardless of whether the exercise itself is fun? Then over time, there's going to be a better chance that when someone encounters a cue in their environment that has something to do with physical activity or exercise, that the positive emotion will be triggered. And a little bit more on this is try not to create counter arguments. So you're trying to put people in a good mood, but also trying not to create counter arguments. So changing attitudes about a topic doesn't happen by bombarding people with all the information you have. It's pretty easy to get people with their backs up, to get people into a defensive position. And as an example of this, if a person has to say no to a previously held belief, that may strengthen the association. So the example here is, we've seen these messages out there, you don't have to go to the gym to be active. So it's on the surface, it's a good message, right? So you don't have to go to the gym. There's so many other things that you can do. Treadmills, you don't have to torture yourself on a treadmill. You can do all these other things. But by reading that sentence, again, you're not thinking too much about it. Just seeing the word gym and the word active in the same sentence can strengthen the association between those topics, regardless of what the message actually says. So you're creating this associative link between gym and activity, because again, having to negate that, having to go, okay, no, there's a negative in there, I don't have to go to the gym, is work. A lot of people aren't doing that kind of work, that kind of cognitive thinking, and so you may just be strengthening the association between active and gym. So instead, just say there's many fun ways to be active. Always starting with that positive step forward rather than starting with some sort of negative, and just removing whatever it is you want people to not think about. Just don't even include it in your message. And in the same idea, this idea of threatening people by telling them what they believe is wrong can result in messages backfiring. The same way that a physical threat can cause someone to try to protect themselves. So haranguing people, making them feel guilty, again, I don't believe that this is anybody in this room, but this is how people who are seeing those stop being lazy messages that everybody else is putting out there, that a lot of other, the Fitspiration people, who I wish would just be banned from the internet, but those stop being lazy and it's only an hour a day and get off, you're just, it's your fault that you're not physically active. Those can really make people feel bad, and it's just going to put them into a more defensive position. So, or telling women with heart disease that they should exercise when they were already active and they developed heart disease. So again, those focus groups are a real wake-up call for me as a profession in thinking about what it is that we're trying to do. So the point of these last two slides, again, is just trying to always think about things in a positive way. The bottom line, then, is to start, don't assume that people are paying attention or thinking about your message. You shouldn't rely on concentrated attention. People might simply be glancing at things in passing, thinking about what automatic feelings a message might bring up. And so when creating messages, as I've said, formative evaluation is important. Pre-testing your messages, what might be drawing attention, why is that particular message attracting a message, what kind of emotions are elicited. When we do these studies in our labs, we're using these quite refined computer tasks, but you can do, this sort of thing just by asking people in the same way. What are people actually thinking about your message before it actually goes out there? And is it actually causing people to feel good about physical activity? It's going to be one step towards having more effective message. And then the challenge to the profession then, this is again, I'm sorry for the people at the back of the room, it's kind of hard to see. I Googled images of people being active, and this is just a snapshot of the first page that I see. And so what is missing from this? Can anybody, we're just about done here, we can start the discussion. So what is missing from this page of images, or what are you seeing when you see this? And this is not exercise. This was very specifically the word active. No one's in a gym, so that's a good start. That's absolutely a good start. There might be a few gym ones. Yeah, there's people on a track. But yeah, absolutely. So there's nobody. So the physical activity messaging world is absolutely trying to pull away from that gym idea. What else might be missing? Yeah, so everybody's already able. So there's a lot of, everybody's already active, and everybody's got a certain look. I heard somebody else say something. No one's heavy, absolutely. So I'm going to get right to that. And in 2004, so well over a decade ago, Nick Cavell and Adrian Bowman challenged the physical activity promotion sector to decide on a single clear message. It is really, really hard to get there. It is really hard. So we've got the exercise is medicine people. We have the take the stairs instead of the elevator people. We have the great work done by the Alberta Centre for Active Living. But everybody's working on their own, trying to create physical activity messages. And it's very, very challenging to decide on what that single message should be so that we can push back against the rest of the messaging that's out there. And, as was just highlighting, while being diverse in our representations of physical activity. So these are images from the Canadian Obesity Network, who are trying to push back against weight-related bias, against what the stereotypical exerciser should look like. And anybody can use these images for free. You just go to the Canadian Obesity Network image bank and you agree that you're not going to use them for negative reasons, and you can use these in your own messaging. And I know that the City of Edmonton is already doing this with their Find Your Fit program, and I'm sure there are others, but we need a lot more of diversity in our images while sticking to a single clear message to overcome this idea of what an exerciser looks like, of what exercise should be. So just to conclude, repeating a positive message that physical activity is for everyone is one step forward towards trying to find a solution and trying to be as positive as we can in our messaging. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, we will open it up for questions, and we have this fancy little catch box here. So if you have a question, let me know and I'll throw it at you.
What do you think? No pressure about catching it. We got self-efficacy issues here. Nice.
Great presentation, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Into the oh wow.
Oh, that's
Girl,
cool.
so fancy.
I didn't know that either.
I don't necessarily have a question for you, but more a shared experience as a researcher here at the U of A. So I've worked in heart disease and obesity, diabetes research for the last almost a decade, and with Jason Dyke, as you may know. And in about 2013, we released or published a scientific article on a compound called resveratrol, which is found in red wine, grapes, grape skins, and peanuts and things like that. And so when I seen your article that you had posted about red wine and exercise, it really resonated with me because I've been battling a 5-year journey with the media about this one publication. So basically what happened in 2013 was we had published this article, and a media story had come out saying that a glass of red wine is equal to an hour at the gym. And so we were like, whoa, hold on. That's totally not what we said. Like, this, you've taken this story and run with it. And it's so for me, it ties back your first theme and your last theme about associations and then also messages. So, and then in 2015, we had another story come up that said, exercise, and I think that was the one that you had posted, that exercise and red wine kind of go together. And so my principal investigator, Jason Dyke, he released a press release to CBC News and said, although, we show in our paper that in our data that resveratrol is actually an exercise mimetic and that it is beneficial at the cellular level, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is equal to an hour at the gym, unfortunately. And it cropped up again 2 years later, which was kind of surprising. We thought we kind of had buried that horse. And then just last year, an Irish media company called my boss and he said, oh, you've published this great article 4 years ago. Is it really true that, red wine is equal to exercise? And should we start telling people to drink red wine? And he's like, no, don't do that. Like, that's not what we said. And so I think the message for me as a young scientist that I learned from this experience is that it's really like, it's clickbait. And it boils down to, telling people what they want to hear, negative associations or positive ones. At the end of the day, it's still what people want to hear. And so the media has this, indoctrinated practice, in a sense, to sell their stories, which is, that's what they do. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that experience.
Yeah, and I would throw all journalists under the bus. There are some outstanding ones, and I've gotten a lot pickier and choosier about who I speak to now. Like Andrew, sorry, I just blanked on his name, Picard. Andre Picard with the Globe and Mail, he's outstanding. I have nothing bad to say about Andre Picard. In town here, Su-Ling Go is excellent. So if she calls up, sure, I'd be happy to speak to you. Gretchen Reynolds of the New York Times is also very, very good. But when you get the cold call from, somebody and you don't really know who they are, yeah, you have to be cautious. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's clickbait. This is what sells, the idea of, exercise is the same as drinking red wine, or exercise is the same as sitting in a hot bath, because that's what people like to hear. It's fun, right? It's, hearing the more staid physical activity messages, and then you see that in the comments. It's like, great, another study about how physical activity is good for you. We already know this, enough. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with you, and it's, I wish I'd learned the media conversation lesson a lot earlier in my career, so thank you.
If you're scared about catching this, I can actually walk it to you. Okay. Are you ready?
Hey, Tanya, great presentation. I kind of just have a comment, or I'm curious about what you think about this. So with family-based interventions, there's been a couple studies that have been focusing, instead of the health benefits and the weight loss benefits to being active as a family, they're focusing on the benefits of quality time together and bonding and building that relationship. And I wonder if that could be applied to adults as well. It's quality time with, your friends and family, walking or whatnot. So just a comment, because my interests are in the social area, so I just thought if have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of messages over the year highlighting the social benefits, I guess, but as you well know, I know Jody quite well. She's a PhD student in our faculty, and she does social networking stuff, and so you tend to do what your friends do. So if your friends are active, it's a great message. It's a harder sell, I think. I think it's a great message, don't get me wrong, and highlighting the social benefits of physical activity are absolutely important. I think I'd love to see how that works out with the kids, because I think that is a really powerful way to go. But again, with adults, you hang out with people who like to do the same things that you like to do, so it might be a little bit of a harder sell, but I'd like to see some of the literature on that.
Anyway, and the positive associations with,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so then the more that you have those positive experiences, the more you're going to believe that, oh yeah, okay, I can, have this. And, sports teams do that, so they combine it, right? And we'll go and, do whatever sport we is, and then we'll go out for a beer. It's, it's fantastic. So that really encourages a lot of people to be physically active.
Or, walking groups where you capitalize on your own social network, so inviting friends and family to, develop walking groups, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'll try and throw it closer.
You might knock somebody out.
Walk it right over? Okay, we'll walk it right over to you. Thank you.
I work in outpatient psychiatry, and a lot of the people that we have are socioeconomically impoverished, and they're on medications that, they gain a lot of weight. And where they came from, the notion of exercise is foreign, and yet it's crucial to their well-being. I'd be curious some thoughts around that. Dealing with people who are poor, dealing with people who are socially impoverished, dealing with people who are on medications where weight gain is a side effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, I frame this talk around kind of the larger messaging world and targeting people who this is their leisure time, not people who you're working with who have absolutely true barriers. And I know Guy Faulkner did a fantastic talk last year around, physical activity for people with mental health challenges. But again, the same way that, Jody's comment about the social aspects, if, finding what is it that might bring these people to the point where they're actually wanting to, so going for a walk isn't super expensive. Yeah, sorry.
mean, as I'm listening, the whole notion of lazy thinking versus intentional thinking comes to mind, and I go, okay, that's where a conversation can start, rather than me sort of jumping in and making a whole bunch of assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's the challenge.
So yeah, so having
is-
that conversation and where are they at in terms of their thinking about physical activity, and so they'll be maybe listing a whole bunch of barriers and then going, okay, well here's one that we can work with, and what does that actually mean, and can we break that down? And sorry, go ahead.
It's a huge challenge to the healthcare system because, I mean, chronically poor health costs an awful lot of money, and simple ways of doing something different, like simple in my world, aren't simple in their world.
Yeah.
So the concept of messaging is so central to what I'm kind of mulling through as I'm listening.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like you're really, I'm assuming, working one-on-one or in small groups with people.
Yeah.
So, getting deeper and deeper into that conversation and finding out where they're coming from and starting to break down some of those ideas about what they think about when they think about what physical activity means. Do they want to walk with people? Maybe a social group is the best thing, or maybe they don't want to. Maybe, it's the last thing they want. So
Yeah.
what is it? And, is there a place where they can feel safe where they can walk? Like, West Ed Mall, there's all kinds of walking groups over at the mall that, during off hours where people are physically active. So, yeah, I applaud you for the incredible work that you're doing and trying to start that conversation.
Well, it's really challenging because physical activity is sort of a, leisurely, class-related
Yeah.
concept.
Absolutely.
And yet it's central to well-being, and it's certainly, the lack of it gobbles up a lot of healthcare dollars.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to hear how it works out for you.
That's okay. Hi, Tanya. I have a little bit of question about the specificity of the message. So sometimes we're trying to target a very specific audience, and you can write a very specific message for that. And sometimes we're trying to target a larger audience. I wonder if you have any suggestions on how specific the messages should be.
Well, even at the big population health level, like the great work that UWalk is doing, for example, or Participation, still distilling it down to not having multiple messages within one message. So, you're not going to be able to target it to a specific audience, but trying to, again, keeping it positive and keeping just one message in there so that you're not overwhelming and that people have to think about a whole bunch of different things. But and again, this is that challenge that Cavell and Bowman put out. Is there one single clear message that we can put out there, and thinking about what you as an individual working in the sector, that one single clear thing you can do. That there's going to be a large number of people that it's not going to hit, but you might reach at least those people who aren't going to get overwhelmed by too much. It's so tempting to try to put everything about physical activity in one message, or to have even a couple of messages in there, but just trying to keep the same way the commercial marketers try to keep things down to, one thing, and that's buy our product. So can we get people to buy physical activity by just selling one aspect of it and keeping it tight? So I know it's got a waffly answer, but it's a hard question.
Could you address that specifically to different target populations? So, for example, ability level, age.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Would
then
that
you
be the
can
same?
start to tailor it and target it to different groups. So I'll use Participation as an example. So for a long time, for the past 5 years or so, they've really been targeting mothers or parents, but mostly mothers. And rather than targeting the kids, they're targeting the mothers and trying to get the mothers to be able to help the kids be more physically active, but still always staying on that same theme of what physical activity is. So the Bring Back Play campaign, trying to make it fun, trying to make it positive, and targeting mothers, and then bringing the same thing. So now with the 150 playlist, it's almost like trying to get all Canadians to play. So they're still staying on that same play theme, but now it's away from mothers and to all Canadians. Can we just get out there and play and try these 150 different things?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, we got lots of hands going up now. Are you ready for a catch? All right.
Oh, where do I talk? Okay. I liked your talk because I thought it was just really relevant in general. I think in like an increasingly polarized, what seems like an increasingly polarized society, with people who have a lot of different strong opinions. I think a lot of what you touched on, we can all sort of adopt in the way that we talk to one another and try to get people to actually listen to us, by not making them feel bad about their own belief systems, about whatever it may be, climate change, global warming, whatever.
Politics.
Sorry?
Politics.
Politics, absolutely. Yeah, I had a little more to say, but I'm kind of, I'm bad at public speaking. But I just thought it was, really relevant. I think we can all adopt a lot of what you talked about in the way that we communicate with people about
Thank you, that's very kind.
anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I enjoyed how you were breaking down the barriers too as to thinking about active living. And do you have actually a definition for active living? Because it actually was making me think, well, for active living, you know, for some people it could be going out to play some bingo, or going out to learn how to do watercolors or take a pottery class. And although in my definition that would not look as a training type of thing, but I'd be interested in your group and how you define the active living.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I know before we started, there were slides going up and from the center, and they had all their definitions. So yeah, we talk about active living, but you're absolutely, so that's total default automatic thinking. Like for me, you know, for whatever, the hypothetical person, active living means going and taking my watercolor class. And I know in the working with messaging to parents around their children, and I know there's this really interesting study done by Val Carson, who's here tonight, it's bedtime already? No, who's here today. She, you know, this idea that, you know, I deliberately tried, I hope I didn't use the word sedentary behavior here because I was staying away from sedentary, but you know, she talked about asking parents about limiting screen time to kids and, you know, trying to get kids to be more active, and did talk to them about sedentary behaviors. And the parents were saying, yeah, but sometimes sedentary behaviors are okay. You know, we got our kids coloring or they're reading, or, you know, and not all screen time is bad time. And so in that conversation, you know, the sedentary behavior, screen time conversation were really in its infancy. But I would challenge, again, the sector, so active living, when we're thinking about active living, defining that you are really talking about physical activity. So that people aren't doing that automatic, well, for me, being active, is going out and doing. I have a number of friends who love to sing. They all sing in choirs. And every time they see me, I was out for dinner with some of them last night, and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get enough physical activity. And I'm going, it's not why I'm here. I'm just here to have a nice meal with you. But, you know, they see me and they associate me with guilt, which is terrible. But what they love to do is sing in choirs. And I'm looking at them going, well, I would never tell you to stop singing in your choirs. You get so much from that. But, and for them, that's the activity that they love. So I guess my long-winded answer to your question is really, can you get the word physical in there so that at least you're triggering that idea as opposed to what they automatically associate an activity to be. So, or referencing some sort of physical activity. So active living through walking, or, you know, active living through movement or something like that. Yeah, that's an interesting, really interesting point that I don't have a perfect answer for.
Whew, okay. Forgive me because my thoughts aren't completely fully formed, but I'm Cindy Grand and I work on the Provincial Bariatric Resource Centre with Alberta Health Services. And so when we talk about physical activity, we try, similar to what you said about trying to kind of disconnect weight loss with physical activity, we try to say we're trying to take the focus off of the numbers on the scale and put the focus back on health and on function. And your talk today makes me think we need to make that shift one step further and focus on fun. And we try to do that a little bit with the function in terms of tapping into what's important to the patient in front of us. Is it really about wanting to have energy to play with your grandkids and those kind of things? So tapping into those positive emotions comes out of the function. But I don't always frame it as fun. So I really appreciate your talk today. And I also really appreciate you using the con images, because those are fantastic images to really show what do exercisers look like? What does that mean? It's just a social construct that we have. The Yukon Red Center and World Obesity Federation also have released image banks that are free to use as well.
Yeah, and I would encourage the whole sector. They're great. Yeah, the Red Center was, I think, the first one. And, we've used those images in some of our studies. And one of my PhD students, who I think is here, I think I saw her, is, developing a study right now that's using those images to try to, with people who are living with obesity, to try to positively associate those images with who I am and that I can be I am an exerciser. It's not just the cover of Shape magazine. So thank you for that.
Hi, Tanya. Thank you. That was a good presentation. It seems to be an us against them message sometimes. We could think about that, the no pain, no gain, those companies and corporations that push that. Has there been any attempt to almost build trust? So I think City of Edmonton example is a good idea. So someone got to the City of Edmonton, convinced them that using these images were probably better than using these images, maybe a more welcoming environment. But maybe in terms of media, is there a attempt to build that trust to say, here is an important message for our population. Can we bridge an agreement or bridge some trust to make this happen, so it's not a us against them kind of maybe approach?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. I don't know, but again, I would say those really strong journalists, the ones who are really, the Andre Picards and the Ceiling Goes of the world, are absolutely, that trust is already there. But I'm not, and there's actually, Nike had a fantastic campaign a couple years ago called Find Your Greatness, and it was just a picture of a kid who was overweight and he was running, and that was the entire campaign, and it was just Find Your Greatness. And I use it when I'm teaching undergrads, going, this is it was Nike that did that. And so I think that there's some corporations that are absolutely doing that, but I'd like back to the clickbait idea. I don't think that you're ever going to be able to, some people are just out there to make money and to sell their stories or sell their products. But I think that there's a good conversation going amongst the people with integrity. That's a terrible thing to say, but yeah, it's an interesting point, and I'm not sure that we're ever, the people who are entrenched in their beliefs that the only reason you're not physically active is because you're lazy. They're so far over here in terms of their thinking, and we're so far over here, it's hard to get, but maybe, over time, it might take generations, but, maybe we can start to get there. Thanks for that really hard question, Brian. That was fantastic.